this first morning speaker, Veli Mitova from University of Johannesburg, who will be presenting Decolonial, Epistemic-Authority, Reparations.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Amandine, for putting together this truly Olympian event. This is how I've been describing it to people with all the gods of epistemic. And thank you to the team who's been making sure that everything, I've never seen a conference that continuously runs so smoothly. So many thanks for that. A last thank you to my team who always give me feedback on my stuff, and it always improves a lot. So of course, all the mistakes are mine, not theirs. So what I wanted to do today is present. I'm not sure who is doing the feedback. Present a kind of sketch of some constraints of what it might take for us to perform certain key epistemic reparations when it comes to decolonizing knowledge. When I say sketch, I mean something more like this, than, like Leonardo da Vinci or anything like this, or before. And by epistemic reparations, I mean something that Eric already introduced the other day, and that is the stuff that Jennifer Lackey is doing at the moment. And the idea here is that we owe reparative actions in the form of epistemic goods in order to redress certain epistemic wrongs that we've committed. And Jennifer Lackey's example is the kind of the classic example. You've been wrongfully convicted of murder, and then the idea is that we don't only owe you social and legal reparations and economic reparations, but we also owe you the right to be known, the so-called right to be known. And that's the right to tell your own story about yourself in whatever way you choose to tell it, and in whatever setting you choose to tell it. And that kind of right creates a corresponding obligation in us to bear witness to your story. So that's the kind of paradigm example. And my thinking is that just as you can do this in the individual case, you can wrong, whole groups can wrong other groups, as in the colonial setting. And so I would like to think about what kinds of epistemic reparations might be owed in this kind of setting. Why should such an august society care about this kind of project? I think both the epistemic reparation scholarship will be advanced thereby, because at the moment it doesn't really have the resources to, I mean, it's very young, of course, but the resources to handle these kinds of structural group phenomena of wronging and therefore reparations. But more importantly, for our purposes here, I think that epistemic decolonization scholarship would be advanced as well. Because for some reason, okay, let me not preempt myself, for some reason, totally mysterious reason, there's not much talk about epistemic reparations. In fact, there's no talk in that scholarship. The reason why I pause this is because it's probably part of the politics of recognition, this whole thing. So this is my big fear here in the background. You can watch it over my shoulder that I'm doing politics of recognition. Okay, so what I'm going to do anyway, hopefully without doing the politics of recognition, is first tell you what a little bit of what I mean by epistemic decolonization, then introduce the basics of Jennifer Lackey's conception of epistemic reparations, and then introduce this ugly term, decolonial Epistemic-Authority reparations, which fortunately these contracts to dear. And then I'm going to sketch three features of that notion, and then continue to explore the phenomenon by looking at two cases in which it looks like we have decolonial Epistemic-Authority reparations, but they're so messed up that that tells us something interesting, I think, about. So do I need to put it closer? Okay, that's how it is. And that I think that tells us something interesting about the contour of the concept that I'm trying to pin down. Okay, so as we heard on the first day, many of us on the African continent understand decolonizing knowledge as a kind of recentering of the knowledge enterprise. And here's a quote from someone that Abe cited as well, Sabelo Ndlovu-Lucheni, And he conceives of the project as an intellectual and academic process of centering Africa, obviously it's the African context, as a legitimate historical unit of analysis and epistemic site from which to interpret the world. So that's what I mean by recentering the knowledge enterprise. And this is not unique to Savelle and Veli. Other theorizers in Africa have thought about it in pretty similar terms. In the Latin American context, I think that it sort of parallels Walter Mignola's notion of epistemic disobedience, where you're rejecting this idea of knowledge as a universal and supposedly objective and neutral notion that's just really projecting the global North's positionality. So this is very basically what I mean by epistemic decolonization. And so it's a recentering to your political and geographical location that comes with recentering on your interests. And I think that, and I've argued elsewhere, that I think that project essentially involves restoring the epistemic authority of colonized people. Why? I mean, so, and again, this is understood as, again, to borrow Veli Mitovan's idea, it's understood as the right to think and theorize from where you are, in line with your conceptual schemas and in line with your interests. And this interest idea is something that I think that Gail was pointing to the other day when I couldn't get the picture of the flowers, but where the problem wasn't that we had a case of testimonial injustice, but we had a problem of something not being considered as epistemically worthwhile. And I think that's this is one of the chief epistemic colonial wrongs. And I think this is why I'm putting it in terms of epistemic authority. This guy is supposed to be saying, well, why are you using all these Western concepts? And I think that it's kind of appropriate to use epistemic authority here because the key epistemic wrong of colonialism was precisely the denial of epistemic authority to the colonized. So, of course, there were many other wrongs. I'm just focusing on the epistemic aspect. So, as part of an essential part of the civilizing mission was that people were irrational, their science was witchcraft, their metaphysics was superstition, and so on and so on. And that, to me, is a denial of epistemic authority. Okay, so if that's the case, and so it's a denial both in the sense of theorizing in line with their own interests and in line with their own conceptual schemas and metaphysical schemas, but also in ways that contribute to solutions to global problems. So it's not good enough to just say, okay, well, you guys have your truth and whatever, and then the rest of us, we, the global North grown-up folk, know how to fix global problems, right? So I think that it's a dual kind of denial. And of course, by restoring epistemic authority, I don't mean something like, oh, here, my good man, let me restore your epistemic authority, right? It means doing whatever is needed and necessary for repair and for restoration on precisely the terms chosen by the previously colonized. So that's the kind of thing. This is my quick gesture trying to avert the politics of recognition spectre. And then the thinking is, well, if we take that project seriously, we can't really restore this kind of authority without redressing the original wrongs of epistemic wrongs of colonialism. And if that's the case, it looks like the framework of epistemic reparations might be quite useful in this context. And that's what I'm trying to explore. If it is, then the question is, well, what do the core epistemic reparations for restoring this kind of epistemic authority in the decolonial context look like? And I'm calling them DEAR. So this is the basic question I'm trying to address. So using the sketch, a very rudimentary sketch of Jennifer Lackey's notion of epistemic reparations, here's what she says. They're intentionally reparative actions in the form of epistemic goods given. I've fought with her a lot about that verb, but I won't comment on this. Given to those epistemically wronged by parties who acknowledge these wrongs and whose reparative actions are intended to redress them. If we just abstract away the given and we say some, so it's not like, oh my good man, here's your epistemic goods back, right? Something along these lines is the essence of the concept, and it's based on the right to know and the right to be known as propounded by the United Nations. So the idea that victims and their families and society at large have the right to know about human rights violations, gross human rights violations. And classic instances of epistemic reparations are things like memorialization, apologies, and education. But as Eric reminded us the other day, that comes with the right. This is Eric reminding us. So the right, that right also comes with the flip side, which is the right to be known, and that is the right the victims themselves have to be a giver of knowledge to others about their own experiences, or as I put it earlier, to tell their stories on their own terms in their own space. So Jennifer Lucky thinks that this is in fact a more basic right than the right to know, because she thinks that you can't really memorialize and so on without, in the first instance, knowing victims. And she says we need to know victims not as merely a means to the ends of fulfilling the right of others to know, but as an end in itself. So we need to hear these stories as an end in itself, as an act of reparation that's valuable in its own right. So that's the basic framework. Epistemic reparations involve the dual kind of rights, the right to know and the right to be known. Of course, it's a much more complex story, and we had a wonderful workshop 2 weeks ago with all the subtleties and so on, but that's enough for setting the scene, for starting to think about what this kind of reparation might look like in the epistemic decolonial context. So I want to pin this concept down by 3 features, which I think kind of jointly, uniquely characterize it. First, the way exactly in which DEAR involve the rights to know and to be known. Second, something that we've already been gesturing at, the essential role of a social group that is played in Decolonial Epistemic-Authority reparation. And then the role of prejudice in blocking certain kinds of reparations. So, and I'm going to use here as an example the traditional healers of Southern Africa. So I think that if anyone has a right to epistemic reparations, here the scientists of, in Africa at least, here the medical scientists who were told that they're witch doctors. They're still in fact called witch doctors by some people. So I think that if anyone was epistemically wrong in terms of having their epistemic authority denied, it's them. And so they seem like a good candidate for a paradigm of epistemic reparations. So as it happened also, the way traditional healers, at least in South Africa, have been formulating their demands has been precisely in terms of the right to know and the right to be known. So here's and I take this to be, I mean, of course, this is not spelled out like this because they're not philosophers, but I take this to be a case of claiming their epistemic authority in a way that is asking for their expertise to be made publicly available. So the right to know in the traditional healing sense is the demand to make my expertise publicly available, a qua expert. Here's some examples here that these are a traditional healer gathering where someone is carrying a placard, I don't know if you can see it, saying, people have a right to choose African traditional medicine, give them the information. So straightforward, the right to know, appeal to the right to know. And I think the WHO has provisions for that kind of thing, or at least recommendations for traditional healers around the world. They're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but at least, well, there's some gesturings there. But I think that if we're going to have proper decolonial epistemic authority reparations, we also need to foreground the people's right to be known, in particular, their right to be known as experts in the field, I think, because this is precisely what was denied by colonization. That these are just witch doctors, they're not really medical professionals. And again, the WHO has some gesturings in that direction as well. So cool. So that kind of reparation involves both the right to know and the right to be known in each case as experts. Here's and Jose, you and I have been talking about this for a few days now. The idea that this kind of reparation also essentially involves social groups, and it involves social groups, differently situated social groups. And that's because the wrongs that were involved in colonialism were clearly, in the first instance, structural. So they were perpetrated by a particular group of people on various others. And so I don't think that these wrongs can be individually redressed. So of course, I could individually repair relationships with a person by bearing witness or by listening to their story. I can repair my relationship with that person, but that doesn't expiate or address any bigger picture wrongs that my group has caused other groups around the world. And I think that if we take that idea seriously, it means that we're going to need a much more collective account than we have of group victimhood, of group epistemic wrongs, of group reparative actions, of what it is for a group to bear witness to the group wrongs of another group, and so on. And that is something that Abe was already gesturing at on the first day. I mean, I have different ideas about these groups, but it was something that, like, I think that also what Jose was saying yesterday, when we're crossing that individual collective divide, we probably need to be quite careful about what kinds of collectives we're talking about in many instances. The kinds of collectives I'm talking about here are very, very weird collectives, right? So they're not like the social ontologist guys, right? So they're not like a corporation or a university. The kinds of groups that people talk about in terms of assigning responsibilities, holding accountable, and so on. Those groups have very clear structures, they have very clear constitutions, they have very clear spokespeople. Membership in those groups is voluntary. But the kinds of groups that we're interested in fact, like everyone in this room keeps talking about these groups, are not like that at all. Membership is very often involuntary. There's no constitution, fortunately. There's fortunately no spokespeople except in times of trouble, and so on. So this is just a warning that taking this project seriously of group epistemic reparations is like, comes with some heavy theoretical burdens. And sometimes I'm thinking, okay, these groups are so weird that if we're going to take it seriously, maybe the talk should be called Decolonial Epistemic Reparations, or How I Gave Up Epistemic Reparations, because it may just be that these collectives are so untheorizable in any standard terms that either we need to revise our ideas about agency and responsibility and so on, or maybe just this kind of project is not viable. I'll leave it up to you. Whether you're going to have the modus ponens or the modus tenens. Okay, so that's the second feature of Decolonial Epistemic-Authority reparations, that it owes us an account of group responsibilities and victimhood and so on. And the third one is that certain kinds of prejudice, in particular, what Larry Blum has called inferiorizing racism, are going to block Decolonial Epistemic-Authority reparations. So it seems to me like individual reparations for various wrongs can be done while certain kinds of prejudices exist. Maybe they get the reparations get blocked causally. But I think that in the case of Decolonial Epistemic-Authority reparations, if you retain any trace of the original prejudices that were responsible for colonization, then those reparations will get blocked. So there won't be genuine reparations. So that's a hunch, and I haven't developed it. I haven't developed it properly. So these are the three features of Decolonial Epistemic-Authority reparations. what I want to do in the last 5 minutes and 20 seconds is to have a look at 2 cases of botched decolonial epistemic authority reparations by way of continuing to theorize a little bit the concept or getting it into focus a little bit. The first is what I'm going to call epistemic authority whitewashing. And again, using traditional healers. So these are going to be supposed epistemic reparations that make it look like epistemic authority is being restored, but in fact, it's being sabotaged in probably worse ways, not trying to restore it altogether. And I have in mind the first WHO Traditional Medicine Global Summit last year. So those of you who were watching that space, it sounded like an amazing idea. We were all celebrating for the first time that WHO is going to have traditional medicine on the forefront and acknowledging it as proper science. And then you went to their website, and it looks like a large yoga class for bored white housewives. And you're like, right, so sure, that's exactly the image we want of traditional medicine. You're like, okay, maybe the guy who did the website was really incompetent. So you flip to the next one, to the advisory panel, and then you get every single person on the panel, a university professor, right? Starting with the 2 co-chairs, this one being particularly qualified, coming from the Maryland School of Medicine in the US, and being co-affiliated with the Zurich Medicine something or other, which we all know already famous in traditional medicine. So the idea is that so we're doing something here. We're supposedly acknowledging epistemic authority while still letting the big global north guy dictate the institutions that are pitched against traditional medicine, dictate the terms of the summit. And so for those of you, I mean, if anyone here is interested in Black feminism or in epistemic oppression or any of these things, there's some neighboring concepts I think that we could use from that literature to help us theorize this kind of botched epistemic authority reparation. In particular, Hill Collins's idea that institutionalizing certain liberatory resources defangs them because they start serving dominant interests. And Emmeline Davis's similar idea of epistemic misdirection of resources that have already been appropriated by dominantly situated knowers. And so the second kind of botched idea that I want to talk about is what I'm going to call tokenizing idea. And here I have in mind something that was kind of gestured at a couple of times in various talks. So where you're supposedly restoring epistemic authority, but actually tokenizing the person to whom you're supposedly restoring epistemic authority. And I'm thinking here of attempts to decolonize philosophy around the world by chucking in a few African readings or other colonized philosophies readings, and feeling that we've done our job and we can carry on. And I think that just, and surprisingly enough, that's done in South Africa as well, rather too often. Obviously, it kind of essentializes African philosophy scholarship by assuming, that there's just one kind of African philosophy, whatever, and Africa is a very big place. You'll be surprised to hear, despite the Mercator maps. And also that there's just one kind of philosophy, as in there's no African epistemology, African ethics, and so on. And it, of course, tokenizes the people who are inevitably chucked into that syllabus, like Kwasi Wiredu and so on. So that's another instance, I think, of where we're supposedly trying to restore epistemic authority in ways that actually subvert it. Again, neighboring concepts from our literature is another one from Emmeline Davis, where she talks about credibility excess in kind of typecasting and tokenizing, which becomes a form of testimonial injustice and exploitation. Although maybe in this case it's not testimonial, it's more like the epistemic worth kind of injustice that Gail was gesturing at. And Gail's own paper from 2020, where she discusses various kinds of inclusions that can deepen oppression. So this is a very brief sketch of meaning this kind of sketch. At least setting some constraints on what it is that if you're interested in this idea, you need to be doing. So first of all, we would need to be articulating the right to be known as an epistemic authority or as an expert. We need to be articulating group victimhood, group wrongs, and group reparative action. And the kinds of role that prejudice plays in blocking genuine reparative action. And finally, we need to have a principled account of when certain ways of epistemic reparation, a genuine versus bogus and more harmful. Thank you very much.